Welcome to A Question of Place, Race and Spoken Word in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us. Real-time captioning and American Sign Language interpretation are available during today's live program. To view the simulcasts that include these services, please use the link provided in the comments section. If you are viewing this program after the live broadcast, please note that it will also be made available on our website with closed captioning. My name is Kimberly Springle. I am the founder and principal consultant of Nile Congo Cultural Consulting and currently serve as the executive director of Charles Sumner School Museum and Archives, which is the official museum and repository dedicated to preserving the history of DC's public education system. It is my honor to serve as the moderator for this afternoon's event. Today, we invite you to participate in a conversation about the intersections of place, race, activism, and art. The discussion will feature dialogue and spoken word performances from three major Washington, D.C. cultural icons. We will explore their role in contributing to the D.C. arts and culture scene and using their voices to inspire change, create understanding, and ameliorate contention and strife in an evolving Washington, D.C. landscape. We'll be taking your comments in the live chat below, so please feel free to engage with us using the chat feed. I am pleased to share with you that if you're not familiar with the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, you just received a small sample in the opening audio, which is a 1987 clip of the DC Go-Go group Junkyard Band performing one of their popular protest songs, The Word, on a festival stage. Although you can't view the video, I want to point out that the members who wrote the lyrics for the song were as young as 9 years old. If you don't know the festival, I encourage you to check out festival.si.edu to learn about programs, education, resources, and more. At this time, it gives me great honor to welcome our guest. Speaking of the word, we have three dynamic individuals who have used words and language as a tool to express themselves, illuminate marginalized voices, and advocate for social justice. Today, we will discuss the question of place as they will help us navigate ideas around place by bringing to life race relations and the DC spoken word and theater scene of the 1980s and 90s, and its legacy, significance, and impact on contemporary times. I will share a brief introduction of each guest, and they will follow with a few lines of their poetry to help set the stage for our discussion. I would first like to welcome Kenneth Carroll. Kenny was born in Congress Heights, Southeast Washington, D.C., and raised in Northeast D.C. in the 1960s and 70s. He is a well-known poet in the Washington, D.C. area. He is a teacher, an artist, and a mentor who in the 1990s served as the director of the DC Writers Corps and created the first National Youth Poetry Slam competition. Welcome, Kenny.
Thank you, Kimberly. This is the Haint of Washington. If you say Marion Barry gets on my damn nerves 7 times real fast, the city paper will hire you on the spot. You will get free Washington Post subscriptions for life, and a lonely federal prosecutor will find love. If you pray to a photo of Marion Barry wearing a dashiki, 3 white people on U Street will mysteriously vanish. A girl will trip during her cotillion in Ward 3, and go-go music will cascade from a cloud over 1/3 of the city. If you get lost on Alabama Avenue, just scream Marion Barry's name, and an ex-offender named Ray Ray will act as your GPS.
Thank you, Kenny. We will see you in just a few moments.
Right.
Our next guest is Michelle Banks. Michelle Banks is also a native Washingtonian and was born and raised in the close-knit Black communities of Capitol View and Marshall Heights in Southeast DC in the 1960s and 70s as well. Michelle is a co-founder of the pioneering youth theater group LatiNegro. She is currently a writer, professor, and teaching artist and she joins us today from Guatemala.
Thank you, Kimberly, and good morning. Sense of place does not only describe a physical reality, rather it represents belief in the spirit of a locale. Nicole Arduan. The map of DC still looks the same it always did. Neat gridded streets enclosed in the shape of a diamond with the bite taken out of the southwest corner where the Potomac River and the state of Virginia meet. But what was once my place is now just a map. The places and people that birthed and raised me have all disappeared, victims of peoples and policies that don't care about the history and struggle and the beauty that made the city home. The city within the map no longer embraces me. Without the people, the energy, the rhythms and cadence, everybody and everything, the diamond is nothing more than a shell, the place I used to call home.
Thank you, Michelle. We'll see you with the group. Our next guest is Quique Aviles. Quique was born in El Salvador in a rural community and arrived in the emerging Latino community of Washington, D.C. in 1980 at the age of 15, right on the heels of the election of Ronald Reagan. Quique is a dynamic performer and artist and is known for incorporating socially conscious content in his work.
This is an excerpt from Latinhood. What does it feel like inside? What color is this Latinhood? How does it do what it does? What language does it like to speak? What color is this Latinhood of mine? Is it black Latin, brown Latin, white Latin, welfare recipient, registered to vote, legal or illegal?
Thank you, Quique. And at this time, I'd like to welcome everyone. Thank you, Kenny, Michelle, and Quique, for your creative words and establishing the tone for this conversation. As we consider place, each of your selected poetry excerpts provided us with a sense of the Washington, D.C. locale. We will discuss more about your specific work in the city, but I want to start this dialogue as it relates to aspects of who you are and how you developed your voice and identity. When I spoke with each of you, you each mentioned your unique experiences with reading and learning from those considered to be the most essential writers in the Western canon, such as William Shakespeare and Walt Whitman. So I want to start with Kenny, who mentioned to me about his experience at McKinley Tech, how he had this English literature teacher who was colorfully dressed and very passionate about teaching the canon, and kind of lit this great interest in you to further read, and you developed a love for Whitman in particular. Mm-hmm. Could you share also about how later you really learned about the Black arts movement and became grounded in that, and why it is significant to you as it pertains to finding and developing your voice, both learning the canon and being grounded in the Black arts movement?
Well, it actually happened the opposite way. So as a junior high school student attending Taft Junior High in Northeast DC, I would walk back home to the public housing community, Montana Terrace, where I lived. Between the two places was the Woodridge Library. And in that library, I got exposed to my first taste of Black literature, and a literature I hadn't been familiar with outside of, say, like Langston Hughes and Paul Laurence Dunbar. As a schoolboy, I got in, and one of the first anthologies I picked up was one called Black Poets by Dudley Randall. And I just like dove into that piece and recognized the myriad of voices that I hadn't been hearing that sounded more like the voices from my community. And from there, I was there in the library every day, just diving into Black literature, learning about Amiri Baraka and Gaston Neal, Sonia Sanchez. And from there, when I went from junior high school to McKinley Tech, I had an opportunity to participate in an AP class, AP Lit class. There, I began to get more immersed into Shakespeare, Greek literature, and of course, Whitman. Even though most of what I did with Whitman was on my own, I would cut English class and go sit in the library and read Whitman. But that exposure to literature, right, however you got it, and was just so important for me to understand that there existed a balance that hadn't been revealed to me before, that I could get all of this Black literature and I could get the so-called Western canon, right? And though both of those things could be an important part of my development as a writer.
Excellent. So Kike, well, Kenneth Carroll, you were over on at McKinley Tech. Kike and both Michelle were over at Duke Ellington School of the Arts. So Kike, I'd like to hear a little bit about your experiences at Duke Ellington School of the Arts. You mentioned that when you enrolled, you were the only Latino student there. And also, of course, were engaged in reading and literature. But what was it like, I guess, walking across campus, and how did you feel? What were you thinking about as a student there? And what happened at that school that helped you develop your voice and identity?
Well, I mean, Duke Ellington, at least for me, was kind of an oasis, you know, because I had come from Francis Junior High, where Latinos, you know, in the northwest section of the city were arriving at a rapid rate because of the Civil War in Central America. So mostly Salvadorians, Guatemalans, Nicaraguans, Hondurans, and we fought with Black kids for to this day. We don't know why we were fighting. It was just out of ignorance. And they didn't know anything about us. We didn't know anything about them. And, you know, we came with all this kind of like pre-made ideas as to what the United States is about. And to this day, I think most of the world has still has that vision, you know, big buildings, wealth, and big cars and blondes and so on and so forth. So there was no knowledge on our part about race, much less that DC was chocolate city back in the day. It was 70% Black. So at Ellington, there were no fights, you know, and everybody was there because they wanted an art education. You were a dancer, an actor, a painter, a vocalist, you know, a percussionist, or what have you, you know. And that was really important for me because it gave me a window through which to see the Black experience. You know, in the school, we were surrounded by jazz, you know, we were surrounded by musical theater, you know, Black musical theater, you know, paintings that depicted, you know, Black folks, you know, as regular Black folks, no. So in that way, you know, this school for me was a, you know, an oasis, like I said, but also because we were studying. I was in the theater department, so you know, I was reading the Greeks, Chekhov, you know, Arthur Miller, Albee, Tennessee Williams, you know, the you know. White place, and that's when, you know, I realized, like, you know, there's no parts for me in any of this stuff. And I had read this book when I was in the 9th grade. It's called Puerto Rican Obituary by Pedro Pietri, where for the first time I had seen how and heard, right, how language could be, I don't know, manipulated, you know, that you can take pieces of one and the other and create things. So that's when I decided that, well, if there are no parts for me in this place, I might as well just start writing my own material. And that's when that kind of decision came into my head.
Excellent. So as you were thinking about writing your own voice into material and adding, can you tell us a little bit about LatiNegro, to set us up for that, and also meeting Michelle as well, just a little bit?
Well, yeah, Michelle and I were kind of like odd birds in the school because we were punk rockers, you know. So and in those days there was not a lot of Black punk rockers and much less Latino punk rockers. So we were the combat boot wearing students of school, and I guess I don't quite remember how we started. I guess we must have started talking at the bus stop because we used to wait for the bus.
Yeah, with Darlene.
Okay, so and then Michelle started hanging out with me and my friends in Nance Morgan. So it kind of became like a regular thing. We were just hanging out in Nance Morgan because that's where I lived. And Ans Morgan was a sleepy kind of place back in those days. Not much happened after 9. And we just to hang out in these abandoned buildings, you know, because there was a lot of abandoned buildings all over the city. And then we used to get into conversations as to what was happening in terms of the violence between Black and Latinos, you know. And it was just one of those, you know, late night discussions when we decided, let's do something about this, no? So we met this other guy, you know, it was me, Michelle, Valerie, another Ellington student, and this guy, Mario, who we had met in the street. And it was 2 Salvadorians and 2 Black women, no? So we were like probably 18, 19 or something like that. And we decided to create a piece, you know, and our first show was called No Breakdancing Tonight, because it was the time when breakdancing was like becoming popular, and you were seeing this breaking crews in Ans Morgan and other parts of the city, and people have come used to seeing young Latinos and Blacks because they were going to breakdance. So we were like, no, we ain't no breakdancing. We're doing poetry.
Awesome.
So it was it was very successful, and then the Larry McCarn Youth Center adopted the project, and then we had a full-time job. We did, you know, theater in the schools and prisons, community centers. Did work on the issue of race and the issue when the AIDS epidemic hit. You know, we did a lot of AIDS work. You know, teen pregnancy. I mean, you know, you name it, right? So yeah. So, you know, that lasted for 12 years. Well, I was with the group for 12 years, and then I became a solo performer. So Michelle could probably say more about.
Awesome. Thank you, Kike. I want to, I was latching on to the various issues that you dealt with through this group. And Michelle ended up at Ellington, but she came from across the city. And when she arrived, you mentioned that when you arrived at Ellington, that was really the first time you engaged with Latino students as on a peer basis, coming from a close-knit Black community. Also, you talked about earlier in DC Public Schools, you were involved with the theater ensemble group, WAIT, WAI, I think Washington area improvisational theater. Excellent. So I'd like to, I know that LatiNegro kind of developed post high school, but I want to take you back to high school for a minute. Can you share what your experience was as far as at Ellington, and also share a little bit about your collaborative work with Kike and meeting him and the impact?
So yeah, like Kike, Ellington was an oasis. Ellington like saved my life. I'm not really sure, and I don't know how cliched that sounds, but I'm not really sure where I'd be right now if I hadn't gone to Ellington. I was enrolled at HD at Woodson in 9th and 10th grade, and by the time I dropped out of school in the fall of my freshman year, you know, like Kike mentioned, we were misfits. And for me, I was, you know, I'm wearing my grandfather's old clothes, and HD was like really mainstream, but also kind of elitist, at least for me coming from Southeast. And when you crossed East Capitol Street, I felt like once I crossed East Capitol Street, because I would walk to school, walk to HD, that it was very different from what my experience had been. That said, like you, Kenny, I would cut school and go hang out at the Capitol View Library or at the library, or go to the Smithsonian museums.
Right.
And then when I got older, I would go watch movies, sit in the Circle Theater over on Pennsylvania Avenue and watch foreign films all day. But at Ellington, what I did is I discovered the things that feed me, and I realized that was theater. I was an artist, so that's what my quirkiness was. Kike and I went to a class reunion, an Ellington class reunion a few years ago. And our principal at the time, Maurice Eldridge, was there. And he talked about how one of his greatest, I don't remember the joy, I don't remember the adjective he used, but one of his greatest joys was having these young people from Southeast come all the way across town from to Georgetown, and how this was our way of claiming our right to the city. So, you know, so when meeting Kike, you know, I kind of felt like I had this kindred spirit in some ways. We would go hang out at the Wilson Center to these punk shows, Black Flag, Dead Kennedys, and we would talk. And through these talks, I found a sort of sounding board for the stuff that was happening in the world that I was trying to understand, but didn't really have anyone to talk to about, because I didn't have interactions with people who hadn't had the same experience as I had. So we graduated from high school, and there's this line from an early group poem that we wrote as LatiNegro as some. I think it's a bag full of sounds that will probably not make it to college, and that was me when I graduated. I didn't have a plan, so I had to come up with one, and that was me deciding that I wanted to do theater because I'd been at Ellington and was doing theater. And as much as I love Sophocles and Electra and Chekhov and these things, I realized that all of us have a right to have somebody to sing our song, and I wasn't finding that in the work that I was introduced to at Ellington. And I wanted to do theater, but I didn't feel like I was not Hollywood. I was not one of the beautiful people. I was not Broadway. I wanted to do theater, and I needed to find a way to do theater that spoke to me, and that was really about our experience. And that's how, and that's for me, that's what the discussions with Kike, that emerged from the discussions with Kike around doing theater. Speaking of Marion Barry, I learned photography through an SYEP program via RCC. That saved so many of us. I can't begin to say those summer job programs really were like real jobs back in the day. And I started working at the LAYC with Kike as a photographer on this oral history project, and these conversations continued. And eventually, I began to sort of understand that my role as an artist was not to go off and be on TV. I remember I had a friend at Ellington, when are you going to audition for the Cosby Show? And I was like, well, I don't know that that's really that's not really in my wheelhouse. But this is what I'm doing, and we're going to be doing this work out at Oak Hill, and or Lorton Youth Center. And these other places. So that's what we were about.
That's fantastic. You mentioned the Summer Youth Employment Program. Someone from the live chat mentioned that they saw a LatiNegro performance.
And the summer, those were
in 1985. So that's an awesome connection. Well, at this time, we're going to take another pause and not a pause rather, but a continuation and hear a collaborative piece between Kike and Michelle. Would you like to set it up?
Yeah. Yeah, this is this piece was written in 1991, or so it says here. But I guess, but this is the time when we were questioning, who we are as people, no? And this was called On the Question of Race. They asked me to write down my race, and I think very seriously, and consider writing down the truth, and have my answer read. I have a dark man listening to a bolero, lighting a match inside this body. So?
They asked me to write down my race, and I think very seriously, and consider writing down the truth, and have my answer read. I have a cargo of stolen people crossing the Atlantic, headed to a stolen land inside this body. I have a brown man. He's painting a picture. We share a secret. It hides in the memory of a kiss.
I have a drunk man asking for directions. He wants to go home, wants you to tell him which highway leads to Cuscatlan. I have all these people, all these drums, all these güiros, all these aguacates, this prescribed Latinhood, this Spaniard name that doesn't agree with English only.
I have an old man, he is singing Patent Juba, passing on the tradition through the rhythm in his hands, a schoolgirl in Bahia, and a young man cutting cane just outside of Santo Domingo. But you don't sound like, and Black girls don't, all these voices that have not yet learned to speak, all these sewas and nahuales and orisha, all these rhythms, these languages, these songs. They asked me to write down my race, and I think very seriously and consider writing down the truth and have my answer read.
I have 18th and Columbia Road, 15th and Irvin, Petworth, Shaw, Julio Iglesias, and Lilo Gonzalez inside this body.
I have east of the river memories, Titty Bump, Royal Crown Hair Pomade, the Shrimp Boat, Eastgate, Marvin Gaye, and an E-flat boogie inside this body.
I have a son named John Enrique who's brown and black and human and tender. I have you inside this body.
I have a blanket of survival stories woven from my ancestors' laughter inside this body.
But I stop and I simply write down Hispanic.
But I stop And I simply write down Black.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome.
Fire.
Yes, yes,
Fire.
yes, yes. That was beautiful. This artistic collaborative piece perfectly explains the many identities and narratives that we carry as individuals. As we progress through the topic, we're going to continue on the question of place, race and spoken word in Washington, D.C. I now want to pair your discussion of the realization of your identities with how your understanding of race and injustices shaped and impacted your roles in cultural advocacy and activism. And for the audience, really quickly, I want to remind everyone that Michelle Banks is joining us from Guatemala. So if you hear the beautiful ambient noises of chickens, and that is the town that she's in. And also there may be a slight delay in the Wi-Fi. So just want to make everyone aware. So as we set the stage for this next part, we want to talk about the 1980s and 1990s, the Reagan-Bush years. Those particular years were riddled with social and economic challenges, much of which directly unfolded right here in Washington, D.C. The capital city has also had a long international presence and has always been a space for protest and resistance. Kenny, you mentioned specifically that Reagan politics in South America, South Africa, and here in the US domestically contributed to the way in which writers and spoken word artists would use their craft to draw awareness to issues in society and advocate for change. So I want to start with you, Kenny, and I want to be clear. You left DC, but you didn't go far. Right on the border to the Maryland suburb, within the DMV area. So I don't want to misinterpret that.
We don't even call PG the suburb. That's Ward 9.
That's Ward 9.
Ward
Exactly.
9.
So you moved to Ward 9, right? So you were in Maryland, living a suburban life, and you eventually returned to DC. So could you share with us how that happened, how you ended up coming back to DC, and talk about the community that you connected with in the founding of the spoken word and DC as center?
So coming back to DC was a function of some personal stuff, but I came back to DC and connected with a poetry community, and there's the photo that went up connecting with Darryl Stover, who in my mind was the founder of the spoken word group. I'm not sure how well. I know how I connected with him, because when I came back to DC, I had become more interested in writing. So I was in my 20s, but I never went to a poetry reading, anything like that, had never met a poet or author. And when I came back, I got involved with two important places, the Writer Center, which was in Tacoma Park at the time. And I went to my first reading at Howard University that was curated by Ethelbert Miller through his Extension Poetry series. And at that reading, I met people like Darryl Stover, Jackie Jones, Reuben Jackson, and just a plethora of poets. And one of the things that Ethelbert left us with, he said, if you're at this reading, I want you to meet and get the phone numbers of 3 people you've never met, and then I want you to start your own poetry reading somewhere outside of this place. And so that's when I really began to link up with these writers. And through Darryl Stover, I became acquainted with the African American Writers Guild, which Marita Golden was running at the time in DC. And so it's really important that when I came back to DC was to connect with artists and organizations to help elucidate my voice.
Awesome. I do want to go, while we're in you're talking about Reagan-Bush era and Reaganomics, it's a term that was used. What was going on socially, politically, how did that impact your artistic expression at that time?
Well, one of my mentors is Amir Baraka, and one of the things, again, coming out of my junior high school education in the Black Arts movement, is that the Black artists, part of their job was to speak to the conditions of the oppressed people and to be very clear about the art being both functional and aesthetic, right? So it was like, okay, so if the Reagan policies in Central America are killing and oppressing people, if the Reagan policies in South Africa are continuing the apartheid oppression of Black people there, it is our job as artists to speak to that. And that's really what happened. And really, Adams Morgan was part of my education. As Kike had mentioned, there was a bookstore called Revolution Books there. And that's where I first began to see flyers, US out of Latin America. Used to see free South Africa. And then they had places where you could go meet up with activists who were looking for artists to be a part of the process of educating people and speaking directly to the US domination of these places.
Excellent. So I want to move to Michelle. And when we're talking about political awakenings and awareness, you all shared a little bit about that within yourselves. But I want to know, Michelle, how did your work begin to speak to issues? You talked about being a small kid reading literature and books around that your mother read, and being exposed to like images about the Vietnam War and how that was scary for you, and you wanted to be involved in efforts to not make war happen. So that's like an early kind of political consciousness awareness. So how did you become in tune to social movements and wanting to understand the world better, and how did that develop into your work and your art? Uh-oh, you're muted.
She's muted.
You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, there was
There we
a truck going by. Ambient noise. I had to like mute for a second. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, so let's see. So despite everything that was going on in DC in the 70s and 80s, for a lot of us, DC was safe. DC, you know, the city meant safety for my family, social conditions notwithstanding. DC was far enough south to be country, and we were country, which is what my family and neighbors needed, but also far enough north to be kind of exempt from stuff that was happening in the deep south. That said, we knew that they were monsters. The backdrop of my childhood was the Freeway Phantom murders, the Atlanta child murders, Terrence Johnson, and the folks that raised me understood those events to be part of what they'd experienced down south. So there was always this sense that there's this big stuff happening. And even though I didn't always understand that stuff, I knew that what my place was. But despite being shielded from a lot of that stuff, we were also, you know, like I said, I was aware that it was happening. So there's these things that are happening close to home, but there's also these things happening in the world. And like you mentioned, I read everything my mother read, and I was introverted, so I was always under her feet listening to adult conversations. And she would get Life magazine and Jet magazine and these other magazines. So images of the war, images of the Black Power movement, images of the anti-apartheid stuff are kind of burned into my like 8, 9, and 10-year-old brain. And it's like people of a certain generation who remember the images of Emmett Till's funeral in Jet magazine. That was my experience in the 70s and 80s, anti-apartheid stuff, the Central American wars, the Vietnam War. And Ellington, leaving the neighborhood, Columbia Road, Mount Pleasant, were a big part of me being able to begin to, I guess, kind of articulate all the stuff that I'd been devouring all my life. And although what we were learning, what we were doing at Ellington was very mainstream, Chekhov, Sophocles, Thornton Wilder, I think the turning point for me was the work that we did with Living Stage. So, which was if folks are not familiar with Living Stage, was Arena Stage's community outreach arm. And Living Stage was doing work with and about those people who'd been thrown away. And ultimately, that's who I was. I was supposed to be a throwaway kid. And it was through Living Stage that I learned that our individual stories had value, and that all of us, and that's how LatiNegro was born. So for me, it was like, sort of creating and finding this nexus between the art that I had learned, because we also incorporated that art within our work as well. And sometimes people got the reference and people didn't. So the Chekhov and the Sophocles and Euripides and all of those things. But we also, with Living Stage in particular, we were also finding that there were other ways to do art. And it just so happened because DC is DC, it becomes like this center of political action. So we were having conversations and we were meeting people from all over the world. In my case, meeting people for the first time from other places other than DC. And those people were bringing with them a popular theater stuff, which I had never experienced, and the work of Paulo Freire and that popular education stuff. And we were, sort of, for me, it's sort of learning how to like merge that popular education about sort of teaching and understanding ourselves and our worlds through our own experience, and merging that with theater and the arts.
Awesome. That's a great kind of description of all of these places and factors that contributed to this environment. And it leads me into a question for Kike. Kike, I'd like to have you share with us a little bit about your intentional work that you created. You spoke about the one-man show pieces that you did of various voices to break down stereotypes. You talked specifically about theater pieces you did to resolve conflicts between Blacks and Latinos, and also speaking to police brutality, which was the impetus for the Mount Pleasant riots, or the riots in Columbia Heights. So could you share a little bit about your intentional work?
Yeah, I mean, it feels to me, I've been thinking, listening to what Kenny and Michelle have been saying, is that, we were all influenced by almost the same type of folks, or the same people, but kind of grew up at a time when there was the social awakening that was taking place all over the world. So I came into DC already with, preconceived ideas as to what a better world this would be if, there was a better distribution of wealth, distribution of resources, what, some people call socialist ideas, but also, you're thrown into a situation where you don't speak the language of the folks around you. You don't know the culture. You don't know, race divisions. I was a Salvadorian, period. I never met a Nicaraguan or a Puerto Rican. And all of a sudden I come to DC, and then my family is telling me that I'm a Hispanic or Latino. And I'm like, what? So all of a sudden, you're kind of thrown into the fire. But, once I kind of, caught up with things, and like Michelle said, we were very much influenced by Living Stage, because we both, took those classes. And the motto there was all power to the imagination. And that whatever it is that you came through your imagination was valid. That there was no right or wrong. And also we were learning through them, and I was learning with Teatro Nuestro, the whole issue of audience participation. What in Brazil, Augusto Boal calls teatro foro, or forum theater. And we did that with LatiNegro, where we would come to a heightened moment in a performance where somebody's about to shoot somebody, somebody's about to hit somebody, somebody's about to make something tragic happen. And you yell freeze, and the actors freeze. And then you start asking the audience, okay, what would you like to have happen now? And then the audience begins, an elephant falls from the sky, the cops show up, the principal calls the mother, a ghost comes in and talks to him, and this, So, and then, you'll say, okay, who wants to be the elephant? Who wants to be the cop? Who wants to be the mom? Who wants to be, the principal? And me. And then all of a sudden the actors step out, and an ending is created. So we were using those approaches. And beginning to empower audiences to be active participants in making art. So, it was this period of time where it was just fraught with contradictions, with poverty. You talk about when Reagan came into power, he came to smash all the social programs. Remember the cheese lines all over the place. People getting these big blocks of, yellow cheese. It's just like, it's kind of right now, the lines of people waiting in line to get food because they've lost their jobs. I mean, it reminds me of that time,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So we're kind of like repeating, you know, I mean, here we are, the richest country in the world, and living kind of the same situation where millions of people are jobless. We're, you know, I mean, millions of kids going hungry. So it's not like none of this is new to us, you know? So I think we're just older and hopefully a little bit wiser, you know? But art is the thing that has allowed us to continue to be a voice of what is taking place in our time, and right now that's a lot taking place.
That's a perfect segue, Kike. Thank you so much for that. We are sadly coming to the end of our program. This has been fantastic. As we prepare to close today's program, I would like to bring us to the present, as Kike so eloquently did. I want to talk about the lens of which we can view the future. We've discussed the intersection of race, arts, advocacy, and place, and how DC in particular uniquely shaped your consciousness of race and how it aided in developing your voice and that of your communities. Each of you has spent decades as teachers and mentors and have contributed to nurturing the next generation. Both Kenny and Michelle presently teach, and Kike continues the continuum of raising awareness of contemporary issues through theater arts. As we prepare to conclude and take additional questions from the audience, I want to pose a brief question to each of you, starting with Michelle. Michelle, in a few words, how does the work you have done resonate in your present work in Guatemala? How does this frame for you issues of injustice and the solutions? What have you learned?
Okay, so here in Guatemala, I teach photography, writing, and I've done street theater projects with children in rural communities here, with the goal of documenting and transmitting ancestral knowledge systems. I think that the work of the artist is important labor, and I mean that, and dare I say, very much in the Marxist sense of the word. This is necessary work. You know, certainly different issues, but just like DC in the 1980s, here in Guatemala, because the day-to-day needs of people are so great, people forget that our creativity also has to be fed. And Bob Alexander, who was the director, one of the other things he used to talk about is at the moment of creation, we're whole and perfect. And that's what I'm looking for, I think, in my journey and my work, is to draw from Grace Lee Boggs, how to get to the, how do we reimagine? How do we get to that point where we're able to reimagine things? And I think our creativity is a big part of that. So, it's been stressful watching things unfold in the U.S. from a distance, but also kind of gratifying in some ways. I haven't been in the States since March because I've been on lockdown because of the pandemic. And this reckoning happening in the U.S. has sparked fires around the world among indigenous and African descended people and others as well. And there are still a lot of people here, in particular in Guatemala and Central America, who are not ready to have conversations about racism in the region. I've been told on many occasions that my thinking about race does not apply within a Latin American context, because people suggest that folks in the US and South Africa, because of our experience with race and racism, that we overreact to these things. But I'm going to share one quick story and then I'll be done. But a week after George Floyd was murdered, Amaya Kekchi, spiritual guide, was lynched here. And it sparked this whole conversation about ethnocide and genocide and all of this stuff, and how indigenous people are marginalized. And that conversation is happening because what was happening in the US. A few days after this man was killed in the Plaza Mayor in Guatemala City, Las Vidas Mayas Importan appeared in like just the same way as those Black Lives murals were appearing all over the city. Mayan lives matter. So as much as I would like to be witnessing what's going on at home and being there and lending my voice to, what's happening, I feel that my voice is an important voice here as well. We're connected, and we're connected by blood and history and violence, but also through survivance. Joy Harjo talks about in one of her poems, those who were never meant to survive, and that's who we are. And in my case, I feel like I'm in a position to kind of broaden the conversation here because of the work that we were doing 30 years ago brought me to this place.
Excellent. Kike, what is this Latina world that you speak of? What are the questions you would have for them?
Well, Latina is made up saying it's a story of these two kids, a boyfriend, girlfriend, who joined the 2006 pro-immigrant marches, where millions and millions and millions of Latinos and their families, both documented and undocumented, as well as Americans, black, whites, you name it, took to the streets demanding full rights and amnesty for undocumented people. And those were the only times where the marches had a feel of the 1960s civil rights movements, because it was millions of people on the streets. So these two kids, one is Ethiopian Guatemalan, and the other one is I think it's she's Iranian Salvadorian. And these were based on interviews that I did with all these mixed kids that either one of different parents, but they call themselves Latinos. And they have, they're in school and they're doing this homework on the founding fathers, and then say, what are we, and they're questioning themselves. So then they come up with this name, this country, this homeland, that's called Latina. And they come out with a flag, and and they rename the states. This Plátano, and the other one is tortilla. I don't know. The states get different names, and it's just but it was based on all these interviews that I did with all these mixed kids that are still claiming to their heritage. So we've come a long way from being just immigrants, because before, when Michelle and I used to work with Latino kids, we say, where are you from? Now you don't ask that. Now you ask, where are your parents from? Because they speak like Americans, and if you're not looking, if you're on the bus or in the metro, if you're not looking, you think that you're listening to an American kid, specifically a black kid, because they speak the lingo. So, and a lot of our kids are in college or have graduated from college.
Right.
So that's a big difference, that we have a lot of more educated community. And you also have a lot of professionals, a lot of business owners, lawyers, doctors, painters, poets, you name it. So we do everything. And still the stereotype seems to be that we're just Julio, the one that brings you water to your table, or the one that changes your light bulb in the bathroom, or the one you call to repair your roof, and we do that very well too. And we're proud of the work that we do, but we're more than that. So I think we've come to a point where in the United States, it's beginning to feel the presence and the pressure, because, Cindy and Andrew are coming home with Maria or Antonio, so it's a done deal. So I think that this what you see right now is the last gasp of old white Americans, because the next generation of folks that come into play are going to have had experience a completely different social situation, and a completely different notion of what a true American really is.
Perfect. Thank you, Kike. As we think about the evolution and the next generation, Kenny, your son, is a poet. So in these times, as it pertains to questions and solutions posed by poet community in these times, what would your son say? And then you can close us out with an excerpt of something you have to say about your son.
Well, I mean, the great thing about my son and my daughter Zawadi, who's in the office working as we speak, is that they're both talented artists in their own right, but also very talented, committed, and caring thinkers. And so I couldn't say what they're going to say. I know that in some ways, politically, they are way ahead of where we were. So we think of me, Kike, and Michelle, where we had to find our politics and our voice. There was a space for them, right? And part of that space, hopefully, is what happened through the work we've done. But I think it's real important that as we look at the spoken word scene in Washington, D.C. among young people, that if you go to any of the slams or the readings, what you're going to hear is very progressive work from these young people. And they have been tuned in to the struggles before them and the struggles they see ahead of them.
Excellent. So Kenny, would you like to share an excerpt from Saying Goodbye
Yes.
as we prepare to wrap up?
All right. So this is an excerpt. My son, young poet and blurred joy, is in the street long after you and H rap uptown after MLK's death lit up the night in DC. What weapons can I give him but you, Gaston Neal? You and Fred Foss on North Star, Larry Neal and Henry Dumas, Sonia Sanchez, Blackfire. I raised him on Lucille Clifton and her gospel that we have always loved black, so that he would know that we have always mattered and have always been at war.
Thank you, Kenny, and thank you to the panel. We have come to the end. This was just a sample about the rich, diverse contributions that you've all given to Washington, D.C. and the world. And I want to thank you, Kenny, Michelle, and Kike for sharing your experiences and insight today. I want to thank the audience for participating, all those who watched, listened, and commented. I want to close by offering thanks to Dr. Olivia Cadaval, Sojin Kim, Elisa Huff, Sarah Rothman, Jenny Maycock, Diane Nutting, Alex Taggart, and Sabrina Lynn Motley for their production, promotion, and administrative efforts. Thanks also to Hillary Aviles, Delia Beristain Noriega, Rick Reinhard for their contributions to this program. Follow the Smithsonian Folklife page here on Facebook to get notifications about future events. And find us also on Instagram and YouTube. Visit our website and come back here for the next program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.